Happy Friday. Hello and welcome everyone to Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's Crypto Roundup for Friday, November 22nd, 2024. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-host, David Brill. Our wandering co-host, Josh Klayman, should be joining us at some point soon. David, 2 roundups in less than 24 hours. We've still got lots to talk about. Let's kick it off with our usual disclaimers. And thank you for everyone who's watching on YouTube and X and LinkedIn as well. Our usual disclaimers, obviously, please do keep in mind that nothing discussed should be considered accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. And then obviously everything we're talking about are our own personal opinions and don't necessarily represent the opinions of our individual firms. And welcome our roving correspondent / co-host, the one, the only, Josh Klayman. David, Josh, it's good to see you both. We still have lots to cover. Why don't we pick it up where we left off yesterday if we could. I want to talk a little bit, David, and let's start with you if we could. Pardon me, the news of SEC Chair Gensler announcing his departure on Inauguration Day, fitting it might be. David, what's been the overnight from your perspective on Chair Gensler's announced resignation? And I've got some thoughts. I'd love to weave in an international component as well. But, David, you and I and Josh and our colleagues from Crowell chatted last evening. I'm still getting text messages. I'm still getting emails. What's been your take in the overnight?
So my take on the overnight is that we've seen a robust trade in certain altcoins as a parting gift or as a response to Chair Gensler leaving. And in particular, Ripple's had a strong day. It was up. It's always hard to tell you how much it's up because you're always looking at different reference points. But it was up somewhere between 25 and 30%, depending on your reference point. And Solana hit an all-time high as well. Solana, both Solana and XRP were affected by actions that the commission took in XRP's case. Jay Clayton filed a complaint right at the end of his tenure, and it continued on under Gensler, and then Solana received a notice, from the SEC under Gensler. So I think you're seeing some altcoins that, may have some ambiguity around them rally with the news that he's leaving.
And also XRP, right?
I said that one.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, Josh. Yeah, I said that one first.
Already.
Josh has got her XRP pom-poms in the background.
I want to point out, Josh has been up since the overnight hours, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, trading blocks of crypto, I'm sure. But Josh, weigh in on some of this. We were on the call less than 24 hours ago. I'm sure your phone is still buzzing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, people are excited. Now, it's not like people weren't expecting Gensler to depart, right? But I think the fact that he finally has said it, there were allusions in his statement at the PLI conference, where he thanked the SEC staff and reminded people that, they could be making a lot more money in the private sector or something like that. But I think really seeing him make that move makes it feel real, right? It makes it feel real that at least, maybe not firing on day one, but pretty darn close. So I think that combined with the other news from yesterday, it was again and again and again positive for the industry.
Yeah. Josh, for a reminder to the audience who will be joining us, and again, thank you all for joining us on YouTube and X and Twitter. What was that additional news? I assume you're talking about the SEC loss in court in Texas. Can you just, for the audience's sake, elaborate on some of that?
Absolutely. So the Blockchain Association and the Crypto Freedom Alliance of Texas, I always have to think about what that name is. They brought suit, and others brought suit as well in separate suits against the SEC, accusing the SEC of, violating, exceeding its statutory authority in developing the dealer rule, right? Saying that sufficient notice wasn't provided to the public. There wasn't sufficient opportunities to provide comment. And, the changes that the dealer rule would have required really blurred the lines between who is a trader and who is a dealer. and even some have said could cause some folks to constitute dealers who could not actually qualify to be dealers. So with that as the backdrop, guess what? They won, right? So this was in a federal district court in Texas. Of course, we know that the Fifth Circuit has been, many believe, an ally on the continued fight post end to Chevron deference to rein in some of the government and the agencies from expansive interpretations of their authorizing statutes. And here we saw that happened. And because the court found that there was a violation and that the SEC had exceeded its authority, it wasn't may it or could it cause the rule to be repealed. It actually was required to strike it down. So it was really a triumphant moment, I would say, for crypto and certainly for the plaintiffs.
Josh, let me stay with you for a minute because I think, and I appreciate that, and it's an important point. But I think a lot of the folks in the industry might lose fact of the challenges in the judicial system. And the example I'm bringing up is, it's probably a few days old already, but Kraken's loss on its appeal, denial of appeal. You probably both remember it better than I do. So again, Josh, would you say there's still a long way to go, even post Chair Gensler stepping away from the SEC?
I mean, I thought that David really said it well last night when he laid out, what an incoming SEC chair can do.
Yep.
Right. And so I'll pause for him if he wants to reiterate that.
Yeah, David, join in, please.
Sure. So I think it's a multi-step process. First of all, we'll need a new chair. And then after we get a new chair, we're going to need another commissioner to be confirmed, because then we'll have whomever Mr. or Mrs. X is as the new chair will then have, 4 commissioners, and we'll need a 5th one, which will have to be a Democrat. So we'll need a 5th Democratic commissioner to be confirmed. And then the commission on the whole, the 5 commissioners would then vote on, whether they want to continue litigation, whether they choose to settle the litigation, or whatever next steps they're going to take. One thing I'm not sure about actually is what happens if there is only 4 for a period of time. I'm sure the commission could move forward, if there were only 4, but that's something we can ask our esteemed colleagues and find out. But so I think naturally speaking, first you need a new SEC chair, then we think you might need another commissioner, and they'll also need time to work together and review, what their patterns and policies are going to be going forward. So I think it will take some time. I would say probably into the middle of next year, maybe towards the end of next year, to come up with a cohesive strategy, and then, deal with the individual plaintiffs in each, or the individual defendants in each case, and see how they want to proceed.
Josh, following up on what David had noted, and we talked about this last evening as well. David, fully get the point and the challenges and what I'll broadly call the logistics of a new SEC and what's going on in the judiciary. Josh, does that still apply to the private litigation?
I mean, so I think we've heard from some of our litigator friends that actually, for private plaintiffs, no, that can continue, right? And to the extent that certain judges may have taken certain positions or may have that in their mind, right, may have a certain viewpoint, whether it's Judge Rakoff or someone else, right, particular views. And of course, we also know bad facts make bad law. And so depending on what cases actually are brought, I mean, it's possible that even if the regulators, among them the SEC, cease bringing enforcement actions or certainly slow down and don't bring them when there's no allegations of fraud or harm, right? It doesn't mean that plaintiffs' attorneys won't still, file suit. Of course, as we all know, it's very hard to prevent someone from suing you if they want to.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they will prevail.
One thing I would add, though, is that I think as Congress gets further along on, with potential legislation, some of the judges may defer or, hold off proceedings pending those decisions made by, Congress, and, if we were to see a bill. So I do think that element is in play as well. But that's something I think we should have a litigator come on the show in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully bring some holiday cheer with them, and talk about a little bit about like these specific cases and what we may see with the new SEC chair.
We have no shortage of litigators in
Yes.
WSBA's legal
Some
work.
of my, go ahead,
That's-
Josh.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many to choose from,
Yeah.
all of whom are great, and some of whom have had recent victories against the SEC, right? So I think among them, Jason Gottlieb and others are fighting the good fight as well.
Yep.
Too many to name. But I will say, things like the major questions doctrine,
Mhm.
this new administration and the fact of the new Congress coming in and the new roadmap, if you will, I mean, we could have different outcomes than what we've seen thus far in terms of how courts treat that, right?
Yeah.
Especially as Congress takes it up and to the extent, yeah. So that I think that's something with the dealer rule that's important is post Chevron deference. We're going to see more and more of this. And when we think about the other proposed rules that the SEC and others had proposed,
Yeah.
right, including the safeguarding proposal, including the expansion of the definition of exchange.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't seen those go anywhere, and who knows, maybe they won't go anywhere.
And Josh, to that point, we our focus is the crypto industry very broadly, but I've got to imagine there are other industry segments in markets that are, if not breathing a sigh of relief, certainly looking forward to working with a new leadership at the SEC. I'm thinking hedge funds. I'm thinking the private credit and private equity markets, for example. David, you and I talk about these markets a lot. Let me pivot that point, though, David. If we're talking about a new regime from a regulatory perspective, and certainly investor protections are important. Preventing market manipulation is important. Do you imagine this kind of explosion of new innovation in markets, including crypto, with a regulatory sea change like this?
Well, look, I think so. I think there are a lot of creative people in our space, and I think there are a lot of products that we would expect to see in our space that we haven't. Like for starters, we should have an ETH staking ETF. The idea that we have this, one of the reasons why the Ethereum ETFs haven't gained as much traction is that you're not getting the yield from the staking. And a lot of people who might want to allocate resources to the ETH ETF would rather do it in a place where you get the staking revenue. So there's that. Besides other larger tokens having their own ETFs, I think there's a real market for either a large sort of index of the top 10 crypto assets in an ETF or thematic ETFs. I'm a big fan of the AI sort of crypto tokens and other tokens. There could be a layer 1 ETF. There's so many different options that people would want where somebody else could be doing the work and putting the assets together and maintaining it, and then people could get exposure to it. So I think the creativity and the desire and the demand is there, but again, we've just been in an environment that just has not only not been permissive, but has really only acted when the judiciary has forced them to act.
David, let me stick on that for 1 second, because you and I were discussing it in the virtual green room for a moment. If we see a world where there's ETH staking ETFs that are available, doesn't that severely negatively impact the existing spot ETH ETFs? What's your anticipation of the market reaction to that? Or, will it respond with outflows, for example, to staking?
So my sense is that each of the sponsors of the ETFs would develop a product that could, support yield and support staking, and then there would be an orderly process for them to do that. So, look, I don't think that I would like to think the new chair will not want to advantage one party over another, and so I think they'd be given a fair amount of time to get on the same playing field to do that.
Josh, we talked about it a bit last evening, and I want to bring it up again for those who may not have watched, and I'm sure you've been giving it some thought as well. Do we see a safe harbor in a new administration and with a new SEC chair?
I mean, it would be great if we would. I think certainly. Well, number one, we don't yet know who the next SEC chair may be, but we know that one of the contenders, is an existing commissioner who's put forth not one but two safe harbor proposals, right? So I think when we think of Commissioner Peirce, right? I mean, if she is any indication, and who knows, maybe she will be the SEC chair. We'll see, right? But I think that's very possible. I mean, I think people are going to be looking for paths forward. And, when we went to Washington earlier in the year, I think that was one of the things that that people were talking about, right? Was like, okay, the industry needs to get ready, because if we're in a position where we can make changes, we better be ready.
Yep.
Better know what we want to ask for.
Good point, Josh. Appreciate it. David, Josh, one of the other things we hear a lot in the news, and I've always never been a fan of the phrase, but there's a czar for everything, David. It's a border czar, a healthcare czar. Now we're hearing talk about crypto czar. And we've spoken about some of the names last night, Josh and David, folks in the industry that are based in DC, advocates that have been around for a long, long time. David, let me ask you this question. And it might be early days, but what could a crypto czar possibly accomplish in this ecosystem?
Well, first of all, I try to be the czar of my household with my daughter. Yeah. She hasn't been feeling that too much. But generally speaking, I think because there's so many different things that will be going on in this administration, I think having someone who's really focused on driving crypto policy and working with, whether it be Treasury, whether it be the Commission, whomever in the executive branch and then in Congress to sort of bring initiatives forward. I think that's a good thing. Yeah. I think, it's a new position, and I think, the power will be sort of in what the president wants the power to be, what President-elect Trump wants the power to be. But I do think because there are so many cross currents, it would be good to have somebody experienced who really knows the industry, and maybe not somebody who's been in a political seat before, but somebody who's really deeply knowledgeable about the space to be involved, and then to interface with the different heads of different departments.
Josh, David, your names are in that basket, right? For crypto czar,
I will tell you this, Ron. If it would mean that we could move this forward and move the industry forward, I would move to DC, even as much as I love living in Florida. So,
Josh, please add to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I've said, I think it would be a great gig, right? And whoever ends up taking that role, I mean, I think it could be key, really, because if you think about it, some people have proposed in our industry for a long time, including, one name that comes to mind is Nancy Wojcik, who's at Cooley, right? Who had proposed, that we should have a separate agency just for crypto. And while we don't have a separate agency just for crypto, if we did have this crypto czar or this crypto person, right? This guiding light, right? That person potentially could provide inputs and outputs to all the various agencies rather than having someone at each particular agency. Now, I will say we have known a crypto czar before, or czarina, at least in Delaware.
Ah, yes.
That is what Andrea Tiniano used to be called, right? Back with the Delaware Blockchain Initiative.
That's right. And for the audience who may not be aware, Josh, going back to 2017 or 2016, is the mother of blockchains, back when Game of Thrones was a thing. David.
Before Daenerys went crazy.
Josh, David, Josh makes a really interesting point. And I've got to imagine, I'm going to rip up the script a little bit. A separate agency or a separate governing regime for crypto in the face of a Department of Governmental Efficiency is probably way off the table, correct?
You know what? I don't know about that. I think that if you had like a very streamlined group or a couple of people that were, involved and were very focused on how to mandate, I wouldn't necessarily write that off. I think I think Elon and Vivek are supporters of crypto, and I think there certainly could be a reallocation, of individuals. And I have to say that I do get a chuckle out of some of the different comments that come through about, how one might go about sort of streamlining our government agencies. And I am genuinely curious to see, what comes out of the first year of that.
To be very clear for everyone in the audience, thank you all for joining us. This is not David or Josh or I endorsing Dogecoin.
Yes.
Because I mentioned the Department of Governmental Efficiency, nor making any judgment on whether or not that department will do what it says it needs to do. David, Josh, I want to come back to something we talked about a bit earlier. David, you and I touched on it last evening as well. When we look at the markets and we look at the price appreciation that we've seen, Ripple up 30+% by some estimates in 24 hours, I think the numbers on some of these are over 150% in a month, give or take. BTC approaching 100,000 in the overnight. There really is this sense that you and I and Josh have talked about from a public service announcement perspective.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, very important. And let me give you both an example. I'd love to hear if you're both seeing the same thing. I'd say in the past 2 to 3 months, I've seen a blizzard of multiple crypto phishing attacks. For example, I've seen more and more colleagues that have no relation to the crypto or financial industry reach out to me and say they're going to gamble and speculate. David, what are your thoughts from a public service announcement perspective? What do we need to look out for? And how do we tell the everyday retail investor or purchaser what to be careful about?
Sure, and I think this is really important to all of us and to the WSBA and the whole. I think it's really important to be thoughtful. I know there's sort of those YOLO instincts when you see, oh, I'm missing out on this. Bitcoin's run up almost 50% since the election. But I think it's really important to be prudent and smart about it. And things start like doing dollar cost averaging, doing some research on it, and also like looking. Even though you might not be a financial person per se, look at the charts and you'll see there's a lot of volatility.
Yep.
So I think it's really important to understand that this is a volatile, it's a risky asset, that it moves, tremendously one way or the other. It moves a lot of times on weekends when the traditional markets aren't open. And so if you want to get exposure to the space, just to do it in a very measured, meaningful way. Look, some people think once we break 100,000 that we may break it briefly, get up to 104, 105, and then have a sell-off.
Yeah.
So there's no guarantees that we break through a number and that it's only up and to the right. So I think just being prudent, dollar cost averaging, and deciding, are you comfortable having Bitcoin and maintaining it in a crypto account? Would you rather hold it in an ETF? Like really just be thoughtful about these things rather than, oh, I'm taking 50 grand and YOLO into Bitcoin.
Right.
I'm sure you both have thoughts too, but I think that's really important for everybody.
Josh, weigh in, please.
Yeah, I think David said it well. I mean, I had someone ask me, and you guys know I don't give investment advice ever, right? But I had someone ask me yesterday whether they should invest in, quote, Sheena Ibu, which made me realize that they neither knew the dog nor the token, nor really
Nor Sheena
anything
Easton, the
about it.
former singer from the 80s.
Exactly. So I think, and I said as much, not in a rude way, but as David noted, I said, you should really look into this a bit so you familiarize yourself. People are hearing things flying around and not really necessarily knowing what there is. So I think that's a big thing. But I always, again, I don't give investment advice, but what I do say is, and I say this to Uber drivers and others who randomly start talking about these topics, I say things like, you know what? I wouldn't put anything up that you aren't willing to lose.
Yep.
Right.
But to that point, Josh, when Uber drivers and my former tennis coach are texting me asking about investing in crypto, I kind of get this concern of there's a bit of froth going on in the space. David, I think one of the other things we've talked about as well, to the point that you and Josh and I are making, we don't offer investment advice. We tell people that it's speculative. We tell people it's very volatile. Don't put in money you're not prepared to lose. And outside of, let's just say Robinhood or Coinbase or some of the bigger names that some segment of the population know, David, am I wrong in this comment that the user experience for crypto still is not where it needs to be?
No, I agree. I will say this, that I do think that the exchanges have gotten better and the evolution
Agreed.
of the exchanges, and that I do think that the onboarding feels like traditional finance. And I do think in some ways the UI has gotten better, especially if you're using a desktop and doing it that way. I think that people need to remember that, crypto accounts are not insured the same way securities accounts are insured. And, there are issues like if you're trying to send crypto from one person to another, there's not somebody who's going to be able to hit the rewind button for you.
Right.
So
there's no unwinding trades, right?
There's no unwinding trades.
No.
Only the class action lawyers try and unwind trades.
Well,
We know, yeah. But, another thing I would say too is that, this is a shame it's a shame that the wirehouses are taking so long to put the ETFs, to onboard the ETFs and let their customers have access to it. Instead of having like a registered FA who could give you advice and maybe give you advice on your whole portfolio, people are really having to do it on their own. And, when it comes to financial services, I think everybody should always have choices. And I'm not a fan of it being excluded, but this is absolutely one time where people probably want to talk to their FAs and get some advice and maybe get an allocation. But, the wirehouses have been very deliberate here. And it's almost a year now, but one of these days, I think they'll finally come around.
David, to that point, real quickly on the wirehouses, it feels very much like in the meme stock craze days. There's this perception that large firms, I won't name them, basically cut off clients from investing in these with the idea that they were doing it for their own good, essentially. Do you think that's part of the wirehouse reticence to make this available to clients?
If I really had to guess, I think that the wirehouses are concerned about suitability and concerned about lawsuits if people were to invest in crypto and it didn't go their way. But again, I also believe in individual responsibility and that people have to take, responsibility for their actions. And, if you put, 5% of your portfolio in crypto and it goes down, that you can't just suddenly go file an arbitration and say it wasn't suitable for you. So I do think there's some individual responsibility everybody should take. But if I had to guess, it would be they needed to wait a certain amount of time just to see that the ETFs function as they should, which they do. And then you probably have some very conservative, compliance and risk departments that are worried about these suitability type issues.
Josh, what about you? When the head of the Josh Klayman family office calls and says, "Look, we should start allocating more to crypto and meme tokens," what are your thoughts about it?
I mean, I'm like you in the crypto space, so if I were to say, oh, I don't think anything should be allocated, that would be false, right? But I think also, to the extent that one plans to keep working for a long time, I mean, I think it's a different scenario than if one is, planning to retire tomorrow.
So that's an interesting point, Josh, right? Here's, the thesis we've had for a long time is it's also the generational conversation. So it may not be the RIAs, David, calling, fossils like you and I and saying, look, allocate a lot to crypto, but you can imagine the generation following your child and their child, for example, might really have this as a significant part of overall portfolio management. How long do you think that takes?
Look, I think it's taken long enough in my mind. We're almost at a year in January.
Damn it, move faster, people.
Look, I really, you have well-functioning trading ETFs that have been tested with volatility, which we've seen in the last 9-12 months. I think it's about time. Look, I have a 401k. I started working at FTI over a year ago, and I have 2 years worth of contributions. I certainly would like to put some of that into Bitcoin ETF. I'm not saying I'd YOLO it all in there, but I'd certainly like to have the option to do that. And we're with Merrill Lynch, and there's no option of doing that. And so I think that's a little disappointing.
Josh, let me ask you a question. Go ahead. I'm sorry. You go.
I was just going to say, I think though, it may have taken a year to get people into it, but we did see the CEO, or it was reported that the CEO of Schwab, right, indicated that they're going to enter. And, I think statements like that in the media, at least what was reported, which was something like conveying some sort of almost, I don't want to mischaracterize it, but like embarrassment for not having already been investing in crypto. I think messages like that from folks like that really are meaningful, perhaps to different generations, right? And help move that along.
Although, David, as you tell me, and I hope you don't mind me raising it, you have a certain young family member who is not a crypto fan, and apparently we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. But look, I think, and I will also tell you something, that because we have not had favorable regulation, a lot of the products and services that customers could use in the US, they haven't been accessible. We don't have stable coin legislation. We still have this taxing structure where every time you would use Bitcoin, you'd have to report basis on it to buy, a coffee or something. like, unfortunately, the recent regulations have stacked the deck a little bit against consumer products that use and leverage crypto. And so my hope is that these, get addressed shortly, and then we'll see more mainstream adoption, and we can, stop sighing when asked us, well, what does this actually do? And we can show people a lot of interesting things that it actually does.
David, Josh, it brings me to one other thing. I want to harken back to our our PSA announcement generally. And David, you and I talked about user experience and user interface. The one other thing that I think really still is lagging is something we haven't spoken about in a while, because I think the three of us are so used to it, is cold storage capabilities.
Yeah.
And while we've seen innovations there, it is still not an easy user experience. And I would argue, David, Josh, tell me if you disagree, that the importance of being able to store your own private keys is critical, particularly thinking back to what I just mentioned a little while ago, which is I get a phishing scam email every day telling me how I'm going to be, I need to access my crypto account, and I know it's spam. David, am I wrong?
No, I think you're totally right. And I always say to people, don't click on links that you get in your text messages.
Right.
Either use your mainframe computer, or look at what the actual website is and just try and see if it's real, through other means. So no, you're not wrong at all. And look, I know that folks have been trying, but I wish that, a company that's really good with UI and UX and design. I don't know if we're going to get an Apple wallet anytime soon, but I do wish somebody could come up with a cold storage that really is user friendly and effective.
I shouldn't store my private keys as text files on my old Commodore 64, is what you're saying, correct, David?
Ron, I thought you had a computer older than that, actually, but okay.
There's an old Timex Sinclair somewhere in the attic, David.
No, I would not put it on your. And look, I'll make one other comment. Like, I'm actually not a proponent of people, accessing their crypto on their phones. I actually think it's better off that they're done sort of on mainframe. And
why, David? Can you just peel that back a little bit?
I just think, there's some people who have large holdings who've been put at risk because they have access to them on their phones.
Yeah.
And, you sort of read about it, or you could Google about it. But I think if you're not somebody who's really actively in the market, I'm not a fan personally of people trading crypto on their phones in case, something were to happen to them. And I personally don't do that.
And David, you and I and Josh have seen there are some very famous cases of people who have been SIM swapped, for example, for tens of millions of dollars, that are in litigation against both the cell phone company and the exchange that they were using, simply because they were SIM swapped out of their code. So again, back to the PSA idea, David, be careful. It is speculative. Secure everything that you can. Pardon me, David, Josh, let's pivot a little bit. I don't know if we've had new economic data today, David, but I've been thinking about it since our conversation yesterday afternoon. And we've mentioned volatility a lot in the past 12 hours, the three of us. Yet the VIX is still around 17. I think it was down to 14 a few days ago. David, when we look at the landscape of potentially good economic growth, I think there are many economists not even saying soft landing anymore. I heard earlier on Bloomberg Radio this week, what landing? We just keep flying. Does that bode well for crypto, or does that bode not well for the exuberance we might see?
Well, look, I think everyone's going to have their own impression about what this economy will look like with a new president and new heads of the important departments. One thing I'm noticing is that I feel like our economy is stronger than in Europe. And so if that does remain the case, that we'll probably have a stronger dollar. And stronger dollars typically have not been good for crypto and Bitcoin in general. I don't see that as a massive headwind right now, but I would counterbalance that headwind with my sense that the wirehouses will finally let their customers have access in 25 to crypto and different crypto assets. So I think there's going to be a bit of a trade-off, I would say.
Mm-hmm. David, does your calculus change? And Josh, I'd certainly love to hear your thoughts on the macro, but does your calculus change, David, if the Fed cuts interest rates in December and going into the new year?
I don't think that the market would respond to 25 basis points in December, right? I don't think it would in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. I think the bond market right now has a view that's not consistent with what the Fed's view is with regard to interest rates.
You mean
Now, I
higher
haven't-
yields on the
yeah,
long end?
I
Yeah.
mean, the 30-year yields I didn't look today are still over 7%.
Yeah.
And I don't think that 25 basis points might change very much. I think if anything, honestly, the way the bond market's acting, it will only hurt savers if they cut interest rates right now because their savings rates will go down.
Yeah. And you're not even seeing it percolate to things, David and Josh, like mortgage rates. I had read, I think
Yeah.
2 or 3 days ago, I think 30 years are now over 6 1/8 or something. Certainly not helping people who might want to, buy a new house. Josh, weigh in, and I know the macro is not your particular focus, but when these new, pardon me, firms cross your radar and you see builders building, do you get a sense of where the economy is going from a crypto perspective, given the perch you got in law?
I mean, as you noted, and as you can probably see from my face,
I keep
a
doing this
lot
to
is
Josh.
going
I'm
in the
sorry.
market, right? Like a lot is deals are really happening, and people are clamoring to get things done. I actually think Stephen Pally gave a really great, very sage post on
Yes.
LinkedIn about the care one should take when papering deals now. Um, talking about crypto litigation exists because of what came before it, right? Which often is exuberance. He said it a lot better than I'm saying it. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of what I'm seeing in the market, in terms of builders building, deal makers dealing, etc., that's for
And
sure.
these are not fly by night kind of, we want to launch a token offering and make millions of dollars and disappear. These are legitimate, these are important use cases, right? And David, you're probably seeing the same thing.
Yeah, no, look, I am seeing a lot of it, and we have a number of clients that are looking at different opportunities. Look, and you also have very large crypto companies that have treasuries that want to diversify, whether it be just diversify out of their own token or in crypto into other things. And so crypto adjacent businesses and things like that. So, look, I think there is really, you know, I think the best analogy that somebody used with me yesterday is that people feel like there's nobody's foot is on their throat anymore and that they can
Right.
breathe again and really think about and be creative about what they want to do in this country. And I think that'll be a real benefit. And look, and I think for the cynics, I think we'll see in the first 6 months or year of next year, who sits in these seats and what legislation's put forward and what pronouncements are made.
For the audience, what are we, go ahead, Josh, you go.
Oh, I was just gonna say very quickly, it occurs to me in many cases, what was the word? The word was that Gary Gensler wanted to be Treasury Secretary.
Yeah.
Right? It's when people were thinking about what the possible implications were, right, of the election. I mean, that in many, if you're thinking that that might be an outcome, that's going to have an effect on the moves that you make.
Yeah.
And so now we know that that's not happening. But anyway, David, I didn't mean to interrupt you or Ron.
David, for the audience, Josh, really good point. But David, for the audience, you said you and I and Josh know we've heard this phrase crypto adjacent. For the audience, what is your picture on what are crypto adjacent businesses and how do you look at them?
Well, sure. Like I would say, mining, crypto
Yeah.
mining, data centers, energy production, and access to energy. Look, it could be, partnering with a design firm, a technological design firm, so we finally get better UI for our crypto wallets and a cold storage. I think there's a variety of things, and I think, look, any company that has all of their eggs in one basket, they might just want to diversify into other things. So it could be even not a crypto adjacent company, but something that they feel is safe that will be a good steward of their treasury.
David, Josh, we're approaching time, and I've been talking so much that I'm beginning to lose my voice, as you both know. Josh, let's wrap it up. What are you going to be looking forward to in the coming days? We'll be back this time next week, I think, because it's the day after Thanksgiving, depending on travel schedules. But Josh, what's coming up for you?
So a lot. I can't go through it right now, but I did want to say that one thing we didn't cover, but I think it's worth mentioning just very quickly, is about the Lido case,
Oh,
right?
yes.
And about the importance just about having a legal wrapper, an insulation of liability, limitation of liability for DAOs. I mean, we saw that with the CFTC's actions with UkiDAO, We saw it in the prior court case, I think in California, that was about BZX DAO, the predecessor to Uki DAO, where they found a theory of negligence. They found that there was, the whole unincorporated association. And here, as many, had talked about the possibility of, the lawsuit found that there was a general partnership under state law. And this was a court in California as well, federal court in the Northern District of California. And so there was a lawsuit, and the court rejected Lido's claim that it wasn't a legal entity. So I think that's just something, we were giving the public service announcements for people just interested in digital assets. And this, I guess, is a bit of a public service announcement for those participating in or planning to form DAOs.
Yeah.
Josh, really good point. We definitely need to cover the DAO stuff and some of the stuff that's been in the news for our next broadcast. David, while I'm still hopefully optimistic, I have begun to resign myself to the Porterhouse dinner. My only question for you is Bordeaux or Chianti on the menu? And also tell us what you're going to be doing over the weekend and coming into the holiday.
Oh, I don't think you're going to get off that easy with a Bordeaux or Chianti, Ron.
Come on, man. Have mercy.
Oh, I think it's got to be a Barolo at the minimum.
Oh,
but all joking aside, look, I actually expect that we're going to break through 100K on Bitcoin either today or over the weekend or by the latest before our next episode. So I'm really looking forward this weekend, besides doing work on a couple of proposals and work generally and spending a lot of time on X. My daughter and I are going to go see Seinfeld Saturday night, so I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I think we can all do with a little more laughter in our life. And, then I'll be down in Florida for Thanksgiving. So I also wanted to take a moment and say I'm thankful for our show, our podcast, and our friendship, and how much I enjoy doing this. And so I hope everybody who's listening has a happy Thanksgiving.
Same here, David. Looking forward. So happy to be working with the two of you. You've been part of my life for a long time now. So I'm so grateful for this hour that we spend broadcasting. For everyone in the audience, this doesn't even count the hours that David and Josh are stuck with me and the WSBA during any particular week. We're approaching the end of the year. We've got several working group meetings left. We are also planning our holiday party. We're also working to schedule, David and Josh, you may have heard this, our kind of year-end wrap-up across all of our working groups and predictions for 2025. David, I already have people saying, what will you bet on David with in 2025? And the answer is nothing. I'm not going to wager anything with you, David.
Don't speak so soon. The year isn't over. You might just be a betting man.
That is not helpful. That is not helpful at all.
Ron, I'm an honest person here. I'd certainly give you a double or nothing chance at some point. A chance to win back your dinner.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on the entirety of that. For everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. If you've got additional questions for David or Josh or info@wsba.co, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time. Happy holidays, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Holidays.